Listen, I don't give a crap about the Oscars. Okay, that's a bit of a lie. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing this video. I'm fascinated by the Academy Awards as a cultural institution, one formed to artistically legitimize Hollywood at a time when the threat of government censorship was imminent, and how over time it calcified into the standard bearer for the entrenched establishment. George C. Scott was right when he called the ceremony a meat parade, contrived suspense for economic purposes, offensive, barbarous, and innately corrupt. And I myself have a list of grievances for how it poisons the appreciation and discussion of film. I haven't watched the Oscars in 9 years, and I don't plan on watching the ceremony in 2023. Yet I'm struck by the hard swing into populism made by the Academy and their Best Picture nominees. More than any other year in recent memory, their list of 10 is made up of the movies that the average moviegoer has heard of and seen, which is good for, say, YouTubers quickly putting together largely pre-written Oscar content in a ranked list to satiate the unknowable eldritch desires of our algorithm god. When I say the Oscars got it right this year, I don't necessarily mean the quality of the films, more that each of them is interesting to talk about in their own right, reflective of greater trends driving the new normal of post-pandemic cinema. With all that said, here's my ranking of 2023's Best Picture nominees. Number 10, Triangle of Sadness. Comedy is subjective. You either vibe off the humor or you don't. So it really is no surprise that the 3 comedy nominees bookend the top and bottom of my list. Triangle of Sadness is easily the weakest of the 3. Hell, it might be one of the weakest of the post-Parasite crop of eat the rich comedy thrillers. Its jabs at the upper class are flaccid. The depth of its politics boil down to 2 drunk Redditors quoting Karl Marx and Ronald Reagan at each other. And its supposedly edgy, vomit-filled second-act set piece is hardly shocking to anyone who watched Family Guy in the last 17 years. The closest the film gets to saying anything of substance is a transactional love triangle between a supermodel couple and a survivalist deckhand. But like the rest of the film, that thread is unfocused and underbaked, with all 3 characters disappearing in the middle act. I'm not surprised that this Eurotrash satire won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, but its place on the Oscar Best Picture list is much more inexplicable.
This is really bad. This is really, really bad.
Number 9, Women Talking. Women Talking is a capital A actors movie about capital I issues. In this case, a group of women who take action after years of systematic rape and abuse by the men of their isolated Mennonite colony. What interested me most about the premise going in was how a community of women, essentially frozen in time without any formal education or knowledge of the outside world, would articulate this kind of sexual trauma and the web of related social issues surrounding it. The first action they take is a democratic vote. The choices sketched out in illustrations on a piece of parchment because they are all functionally illiterate. But the dialogue oscillates between a seemingly authentic portrait of a sheltered society and buzzy post-Me Too phrases that would make good clips for the Oscar broadcast, but jolt the audience out of the setting. I almost audibly groaned at Ben Wishaw's character, literally saying, "Not all men." Director Sarah Polley and her ensemble cast do an admirable job muscling some complexity into the material, but ultimately it's a film that's not nearly as challenging as it wants you to think it is, which I guess is what makes it the most archetypical Oscar movie out of the nominees. Number 8, Elvis. When making an Elvis movie, you either attempt to cut through the decades of mythologizing and impersonation to humanize the king of rock and roll, or you lean fully into the glitzy artifice. It was pretty obvious which direction Baz Luhrmann was going to take, and for the first half of the film, he is at full throttle in all the best ways. I sat next to a couple in their 50s or 60s, and we both lost our shit when Doja Cat started rapping over Big Mama Thornton while Elvis explored Beale Street. Unfortunately, like the man himself, the movie starts to wear out its welcome after his stint in the army. By making the story all artifice, Luhrmann robs it of any dramatic heft in the back half. We know Elvis will die relatively young and lonely, and yet the narrative tension is weirdly focused on whether or not Elvis will tour internationally or take a sweetheart residency deal in Las Vegas. There's a fascinating tension in how Luhrmann admonishes the emptiness of the Vegas years, while simultaneously reveling in the garish rhinestone camp of it all. All the voiceover finger-wagging from Tom Hanks, in an accent that is not of this earth, about how Elvis's love for his audience drove him to his ignominious death, rings completely hollow. A facile attempt at intellectual depth the movie does not earn. Or perhaps an Elvis film lumbering deliriously to its 160th minute is fairly faithful to the life of its subject. Number 7. All Quiet on the Western Front. World War I has gotten buried in the pop culture memory in favor of the more righteous battle lines of World War II. To that end, All Quiet on the Western Front is a story that needs to be retold every few decades, so that we don't forget the millions of human lives mechanically slaughtered for a handful of dying empires. This German adaptation is at its best when it captures that horror, curiously in a similar way to Phil Tippett's Mad God of all films. An apocalyptic killing field, where the human body is little more than a trifle to the industrialized war machine. However, in the rush to get to the front lines, it skims the idyllic chapter set in the soldier's hometown, one that in both the original novel and 1930 Lewis Milestone film was crucial in humanizing the characters and sharpening the tragedy of the war. That absence of levity lessens the dramatic heft for the bulk of the narrative, turning the 2022 adaptation into a long, dreary drumbeat march to depersonalized annihilation, which I suppose is also the point. There's also a parallel subplot involving Daniel Bruhl sporting an awful fake mustache as the diplomat spearheading peace talk efforts. It ends up feeling like an underbaked appendix to the original story, though compelling enough on its own that I wished it got its own feature-length movie. I'm just glad after 15 years playing German soldiers, Bruhl has been finally promoted up the chain of command. Number 6. Top Gun Maverick. From a storytelling perspective, it's probably objectively better than the original. Maverick gets a more complex internal character, the romance is updated for modern sensibilities, the lost father arc is played more effectively here, and a literal ticking clock provides actual urgency to the plot. The third act delivers everything you would want from the premise of, we let Tom Cruise fly an actual fighter jet. My straw was all chewed up from that finale, and in a year of the maximalist film, it's gonna stick around as one of the best sequences in cinemas from 2022. That being said, the film still lacks the visionary quality of a Tony Scott. Joseph Kosinski is a masterful technician, and fits well within the Bruckheimer aesthetic. But there's no palpable vibe here, outside the charisma Tom Cruise brings, which granted is a whole lot. Tony Scott tended to treat every shot with the same sumptuous energy, and while Kosinski lets his actors drive the emotionality of the quieter scenes to good effect, they ultimately feel uneven next to the daredevil flying sequences. For instance, there's a romantic moment between Cruise and Jennifer Connelly that evokes the Take My Breath Away scene from the original, but like most depictions of sexuality in modern blockbuster films, feels visually castrated. Top Gun Maverick represents some of the best IP tentpole filmmaking out there, but still can't help but feel constrained by the formula that dominates those kinds of pictures. Number 5. Tar. There's something so eminently compelling about movies where you watch a person exceptionally good at their job be good at their job. Even more compelling if their personal life is simultaneously falling apart. Then take all that, and weirdly like Top Gun Maverick, turbocharge it with the explosive power of one of our last true movie stars. From the very first scene, Cate Blanchett delivers an immersive performance, where the barriers of fiction break down and the audience, regardless of background, feels a part of this ethically compromised world of high art. She instantly makes you believe that you've listened to all of Lydia Tarr's symphonies and know what drives her as an artist, before the movie even peels back her public persona to reveal a darker side. It's a fine line to walk, lampshading the smug self-importance of these predominantly white urban liberal spaces, without coming off as smug yourself. And occasionally Todd Field breaks the illusion he and Blanchett set up, most notoriously in the Juilliard scene, where Tar argues with a broad cartoon strawman parody of a woke Zoomer over the problematic personal life of Bach.
Honestly, as a BIPOC, pangender person, I would say Bach's misogynistic life makes it kind of impossible for me.
Listen, I'm in agreement with Lydia Tarr that it's dumb to reduce an artist's work down to their gender, race, and sexual orientation. And even then, that scene still comes off as a cheap windmill dunk to make an NPR-listening middle-aged audience feel smart about themselves. It's also just obvious and on-the-nose foreshadowing in a film that's otherwise elegant and subtle. And don't get me started on how video game music is treated as an ironic punchline, the lowest point a composer can go after a fall from grace. I'm a bit more mixed on Tar than the consensus, but nevertheless, Blanchett is undeniable. My personal pick for Best Lead Actress.
It's my scar! You fucking little nothing!
Number 4. Avatar: The Way of Water. Gotta love how James Cameron responded to the white savior criticism of the first Avatar by turning Sigourney Weaver into Na'vi Jesus. Though, like the most compelling ideas in the film, the immaculate conception of Kiri is weirdly set up matter-of-factly, with only the promise to fully explore it in the upcoming sequels. I guess that's to be expected with the middle chapter of a long saga, and while I also look forward to Korach going through a full-blown existential crisis in Avatar 4, Way of Water ends up feeling like an overlong first act. That means the smaller, more mundane arcs have to drive the narrative. Which, you know, the middle child seeking respect and independence from his father is trite, but still a solid framework to build an utterly engrossing underwater world around. All the superlatives from the first film still apply in regards to the visual effects. Since 2009, Denis Villeneuve and Guillermo del Toro have created films that match the transportative nature of the original Avatar. But Way of Water finds Cameron reclaiming his crown. Number 3. The Fabelmans. The term "the magic of cinema" has been overused so much during this award season cycle, in particular to dismiss any movie about making movies. The irony is that most of those films explicitly depict the process of filmmaking as exhausting and even self-destructive. If there was any magic during Steven Spielberg's formative years, it was black, eldritch magic beyond anyone's comprehension. The kind where one imagines capturing the mise-en-scene of their parents' divorce on camera, or turning their high school bully into an Aryan Ubermensch who defeats the anti-Semitic villain. We want to picture cinema as a vector of empathy and connection, but the Fabelmans show that just as often movies can be used to bubble oneself away from the world and the people closest to them. I don't think I've ever been called out more personally by a Best Picture nominee. The third act is about Sammy figuring out how to wrangle his passion into something more controllable, granting us both the greatest cameo and greatest PG-13 F-bomb of the year.
Remember this. When the horizon's at the bottom, it's interesting. When the horizon's at the top, it's interesting. When the horizon's in the middle, it's boring as shit. Now, good luck to you. And get the fuck out of my office.
Judd Hirsch got the supporting acting nod for a short, showy performance. But I wish Seth Rogen got more award season buzz. It's almost frightening how well he plays an affably corny, square-jawed 50s patriarch. Like, I'd be cool with my mom having an affair with him. Number 2. The Banshees of Inisherin. When I first watched the trailer, I said to myself, okay, this is a Martin McDonagh film. So one or both of these characters has a dark, fucked up, unforgivable past. But in reality, the conflict truly is that petty, and only escalates because neither of these men can healthily deal with their feelings of resentment, loneliness, and despair, which I guess is also a trademark of a McDonough film. What really unlocked my appreciation for Banshees was viewing it through the lens of fairy tale, of the violinist who cuts off his own fingers because his friend wouldn't leave him alone, like a morality fable written by the Brothers Grimm about the self-destructive consequences of isolation, updated for a post-pandemic audience. And like my number one film, it's about the priceless value of kindness. McDonough's dialogue is as sumptuous as ever, and of course Colin Farrell as the sensitive but uncultured, socially awkward bumpkin, and Brendan Gleeson as the thoughtful and world-weary artist are as great of a pairing here as they were in Bruges. McDonough should really make at least 5 more movies with them, like an angsty and depressed Hope and Crosby. Number 1. Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I gotta admit, I'm in utter shock that this movie got any award nominations, much less that it became the Oscar frontrunner. Don't get me wrong, it deserves almost all of the accolades, but all through 2022, I was the asshole buzzkill telling everyone to temper their expectations. That Everything Everywhere All at Once was just too left of the dial for the average Academy voter. That the Twitter echo chamber was not reflective of the broader press and industry. But to quote the legendary James Hong,
But look at us now, huh?
James Hong has not gotten nearly enough appreciation as he should, both in the reception of Everything Everywhere and just in general. He's approaching 70 years of acting, non-stop, 451 roles listed on IMDb. He acted alongside Clark Gable, voiced Dr. Serizawa in the infamous English-language dub of Godzilla, appeared in some of the greatest films of the 70s and 80s, omnipresent as a voice actor in animation for the last 30 years. On the surface, Gong Gong seems like a typical James Hong role, i.e. a grouchy, absent-minded, old Chinese man. But then he sucker punches the audience with the most devastating lines in the entire movie.
How do you expect to defeat her in every universe if you can't even kill her in one?
She's your granddaughter.
How do you think I feel?
I actually talked with somebody who has worked with Hong, who told me that he didn't really 100% get Everything Everywhere All at Once, even after it was put together and became an instant hit. Yet listen to the director's commentary on the Blu-ray, and you'll hear about Hong ad-libbing funny Cantonese lines that made the on-set translator crack up, or him eating tapioca pudding cups, spitting it out, then eating it up again until the Daniels got the perfect take of a shot that only appears in the movie for like 2 seconds. Hong may not have been vibing on the Daniels' wavelength, but he was nevertheless creatively active in building the strange, beautiful, off-kilter world of the film. A true consummate professional who understands the capital A art of acting.
Who cried a river and drowned